Welcome to the S.J. Child Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show.
We know that millions of talented neurodivergent individuals are struggling in the workplace. My name is Jeannie Love. I'm a neurodiversity consultant. From small businesses to Fortune 500 companies, we are addressing barriers and creating empowering environments for all minds to thrive. Whether revising job descriptions and HR policies or providing education to managers, let us customize a strategy to support a high-functioning culture in your workplace. Reach out and schedule a consultation.
This episode is sponsored by Jeannie Love Neurodiversity Coaching. www.jeanielove.coach. That's jeanielove.coach.
Hi, and thanks for joining the SJ Child Show today. I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation because I've been checking and watching a little bit and seeing Mr. Zakreski. Is that how I pronounce it? Do I pronounce it right? Matthew Zakreski?
Zakreski.
Zakreski. Oh my goodness. See, don't let me go and do that to names. Thank you so much for being here though, because I think that we found each other on LinkedIn, and it's so refreshing when we can find unique individuals that we have the same passion for the community, and just kind of have a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh. Well, and thanks for having me. It's, thank goodness for LinkedIn, right? We get to have all those fun connections that, I don't think our paths would have necessarily crossed otherwise, but your unrelenting positivity and genuine humility around this work is just so, it's the sort of thing that ingratiates people, right? It's why you have such a big following. And
thank you.
I'm like, well, that's a thing I could be a part of. Let's do that. So
yeah, excellent. No, I'm so glad that you reached out, and tell us a little bit about yourself and where are you at in the world anyways?
So I'm in Northwest New Jersey. I grew up here in New Jersey, then moved to North Carolina for college, then Boston for a while, then Philadelphia for a decade, and now we're back home. I've also lived in Australia for a little while. Yes, I have, I'm an accent melting pot. I was diagnosed as ADHD and gifted growing up. And so I always said that if I ever got to go and do mental health work, I wanted to work with kids like me. Now, luckily for me, as I finish up grad school, the neurodiversity movement is exploding, and we're having these conversations that, frankly, we should have been having a lot earlier.
Yeah.
But here we are now, right? And, I get to be, a part of that movement and educate professionals and parents and kids and help do what I can.
I love that too. And it's such, like you said, the community, the awareness. I mean, there's still a long way to go in a global setting, but here in the US, we really have come so far, and we're really hedging the way to get to a better place in the future, especially for our younger generations that really need us to be pioneers and leaders in this day-to-day, and figure out a way to educate and help people understand the accommodations that are coming to fruition in their future. Yeah. Just yesterday, I'm not sure if you saw, the CDC had announced and put out a report that 1 in 11 children in the US now have autism, an intellectual disability, or a developmental disability. 1 in 11, Matthew. I mean, that is just such a high number to, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when it was one in 150,000, and maybe not in the entire scope of intellectual and developmental, but what a unique part and era of life right now that we have this perspective and this scope of perception to be able to identify and really help these kids that just need different support systems than the world has known in the past.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And one of the things that, as scary as the number 1 in 11 is, right? I think at some point you reach critical mass where these kids aren't one-offs anymore. They are a large community of people where it's like, you can't, if you're large enough, you can't be ignored. Right. And I think that's why we're changing the dialogue around this, where it's not just, oh, build a special school and shuffle them off over there. You can do that when there's 10 kids, maybe even 100 kids. But if there's 100,000 kids, then the idea is, how do we build the systems that we have to accommodate more people who are not neurotypical? And, and not from a place of curative, right, but from a place of meeting them where they are and accommodating. And that's what we do, right? We try and bang that drum and say, like, hey, they're not going anywhere. So it's on the stakeholders from, the federal level, the state level, the local level, to say, how can I open my doors wider for more kids who need to benefit from the systems I have? And then, that ball rolls downhill and gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you think it should begin? Like, do we start in our homes? Do we start at a legislative level? Like, I know those are two huge different opposites right there. What is the best place to start?
Well, I think so much of that depends on personality, right? I mean, I'm somebody where I'm very extroverted. So you could send me to the state house and I would talk to the senators and the governor and give them facts and figures and show them a pretty PowerPoint and probably change some hearts and minds. I'm good at what I do. But if you're someone who's introverted or socially anxious, or the idea of public speaking gives you cold sweats, then that's probably not your thing. But that doesn't mean that you can't help, right? Because the changes are granular and they're happening in all these different spaces. One of my favorite teachers that I work with, she's the person in her school who makes sure every classroom in the building is as autism friendly as it possibly can be. Right. And that means applying for a grant to get, LED lighting, not those awful fluorescent bulbs. Yeah. And it means like having doors that are easy open, right? Just like the little things, right? And she's not somebody who would feel comfortable with me even saying her name, right? So I'm, so person X, I will talk about you without mentioning her name. She's not a spotlight seeker, right? And that's fine, right? So, if you come into a strategy in your home that works and you can share that out on social media or create a podcast, other people benefit from that inclusion, right? Because it's not just me versus the world, it's me and these other parents who kind of have it similar to me, and we can hold hands and march forward together. So make the change where you can. That's what I say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, for us at the very beginning of our journey, I didn't have a podcast. I wasn't, searching to lead a group of anyone's, but only my own children. But in that came the desire to teach the kids in my neighborhood. And I started writing children's books and thought, how can I engage and really embrace the minds of the children who are around my children to help them understand and better support my kids. And I think just that intent of knowing that, my son is, if he is in these circles of society, it is going to be a unique individual that's going to stand out. And the better the people have around him the understanding of how to help and support him and be kind to him, then the better for all of us. I think that sometimes I have this endearment for him due to the fact that he doesn't, and I don't know this inside him directly or personally, but he has this essence of that he doesn't, things don't bother him. People's opinions or, judgments, things like that he doesn't bother his mind with those types of ideas or thoughts. And what a beautiful way to move through the world. Number one, without judging others around you, and never judging yourself, for one, because you don't hold those ideals, but at the same time, so hard for other people that do have that capability to then use it with the best of their ability to be kind and to be inclusive, and not to come from a space of judgment, of negativity, or, and unfortunately that all starts from what we teach them when they're very little, and what they see and how we portray ourselves in the world. I was just on a call just a moment ago, and I just had this flash of a memory of my mom and I at a camping trip, and these group of Down syndrome campers came up, and my mom lit up with the most excitement and this love that, I was maybe four years old or something. And so to see her embrace this group of people and just with this warm, endearing heart, it really sunk in, and it really had a deep meaning for me. And which is what a skill that I've been able to cultivate, now in the world, to just be like, I want to love all of you. I'm sorry, some of you aren't capable of letting me do that, but that's my desire. So it's these things that we learn early on, the things that we teach early on. So yeah, I really think it's comes from so deep within us, Yeah.
Well, I mean, and that it's the sort of thing that, like, I think people are inherently kind and compassionate, right? And, if we strip out all the politics, if we strip out all the the old thinking that still permeates, at the end of the day, it's a person, it's a kid, it's a human being who's saying, like, please give me what I deserve so I can navigate this world. And, that calls to something fundamental in us, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's something that I think about a lot in what I do, because, I've always been someone who really believes in equity rather than equality, right? Because if you give everybody the same thing, some people aren't going to fit. You've got to give everybody what they need, right? Yeah. And if you have enough conversations about equity, it turns into justice. It turns into, this isn't a conversation I have to have. It's a system I can opt into, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm going to go to this school, or I'm going to go to this amusement park or this sports game, then I know these systems are going to exist because of the people who came before us and pounded on those doors and wrote those emails. And, and I mean, that we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And then the really cool thing is that, so many people are going to stand on our shoulders. And well, I mean, the Destiny's Child show, I mean, that was my wake up call, right? I heard Dr. Matt speak at a conference, and he was like, this is how you do it. I was like, yes. And then they'll turn, we pass the baton on to them in ways that we can't even anticipate right now.
I love that. No, it's so true. It's so true. And, interviewing some of the moms of autistics from the 60s, and, and just hearing their stories of, there was no community, and they were literally the pioneers of teaching the world about neurodivergence, and really helping develop and nurture these what we can now say safe communities to be in, and things. But what an amazing journey that they had to endure and to go through to get us to where we're at today. And I love that you said that, because I hope that in all of the 200 plus episodes of the show that, if I can help one individual or one family have an easier time navigating their ideas, navigating their mindset, it can change so many other people in that they communicate with and everything. So what a beautiful place, and such a special thing to be able to do. Certainly, as a gifted child, and I also was gifted as a child. Tell me though about kind of your experience. What type of support did you get back then? And what did that look like?
Not very much.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the reason I, call my practice the Neurodiversity Collective, the reason I say I'm a neurodivergent ally is that giftedness is a neurodivergence, right? The brain is literally different. It actually has a lot more in common with the autistic brain than it does with a neurotypical brain. So when I start those conversations, I think it moves us away from this like gifted as elitism thing that still is out there.
Yeah.
Like, you just want your kid to go to Harvard. It's like, no, my kid figured out particle physics when they were 4. I don't think preschool is the right move right now. Right. And so to me, it really is, support is everything.
Yeah.
And, and I always say that gifted education is special education. It's just on the other end of the IQ spectrum, right? It's a tier 3, completely reimagining the curriculum thing. It's like, well, we're really good at thinking about special education on the other side, and we should never stop doing that, right? I'm never going to advocate. There's plenty of pie for everyone. Let's all have pie. Right? But it's the idea. It's like, it's a fundamental change. If you have a 4th grader who can do calculus, subtraction's not going to really move the needle, right? It's a fundamental change.
Yeah.
That's why we get school administrators and school psychologists and teachers on board. It's like, hey, you're already doing this stuff. I just need you to do a little bit more of it in a different direction. And because most gifted education programming occurs in the regular classroom, right? It's not, most districts don't have a nested program or its own school. Most districts have, 25 kids in a classroom, 1 or 2 of whom are gifted or twice exceptional. So you've got to be able to layer in content to those kids in a way that doesn't disrupt everybody else's learning.
Yeah.
Or you end up like a kid like me, where I would finish everything in 3 to 5 minutes, and they would just let me doodle on any piece of paper I could find. So I got really, really good at doodling, and that's right. Super good at it. And that was kind of the best they could do, which, was neither here nor there at this point. I came out okay. But it's something that now I can say to schools, hey, there are so many more resources and they're free. And so just do this. And here's this thing that exists. And that's why I share my PowerPoints and my slides so openly, because I want the policymakers to know what I know.
Yeah.
Because then that trickles down to all those kids in those classrooms, and they all benefit from better practices in education.
Yeah. And that is so true. And, for our home situation, my son is also profoundly gifted, and he has never had success. The school systems have never been successful for us. We have tried several different, settings, regular, of course, general education. And then it was 1st grade that the principal said, we don't have a 1st grade algebra teacher. So I'm sorry, this is something we'll have to, pass on. And I was so disappointed in my school at the time, thinking, how could you do this to us? Why wouldn't you put in place a program? Because he's not going to be the only child in existence that this is ever going to happen to. And if you have something in place now, you're going to be able to provide it so far down the road. That never happened, unfortunately. And I really had to take it upon myself and homeschool this child and find resources. And a decade ago, there wasn't as many resources available. There weren't as many online programs available. I had to settle for DVDs that I found, and that would get scratched and everything, right? Oh my gosh. I had to buy so many different, we did a series called Rock and Learn, which paired learning with music, which was so easy for him he loved it. And so he just took the information in so quickly. And, we learned very early on, he was reading at 1 and writing at 2. And at 3, we recognized he had a photographic memory. And I was overjoyed by the thought of it because I had always loved early childhood education and development. But it did, also surprise me when I found out how little support I could get for it. And back then, how little was known about it. And it, guilty enough as it is, it wasn't until this year meeting the wonderful Harry O'Kelly, and she introduced me.
I love Harry so much.
I know, and she's such like this angel, isn't she? This guardian angel. And she just said, Sarah, there's this whole other community. There's this 2E community. There's this, other gifted community. You need to be a part of this. And I said, what? Like, I've been building these autism communities for so long and I'm passionate about it. And here was this little side community that I hadn't even known that existed. And I thought I was, getting all this great knowledge and resources, but you never stop learning. And there's never a time when you stop looking for resources.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And it models for our kids lifelong learning, but also intellectual humility. Yeah. Right? I didn't know this thing, and now I do because I sought it out. I asked the right questions. I raised my hand, said, I don't get it. Yeah. Right? And that's a powerful thing because our kids who don't get that or aren't used to it, you mentioned homeschool. The biggest change I've made in my career has been my thoughts on homeschool. When I started this, I was like, homeschool, and now I'm like, oh yeah, obviously homeschool. It makes perfect sense, right? Because if you cannot find a thing, you build the thing and you build the thing, right? And, and it's people like, oh, so you think all gifted kids should be homeschooled? It's like, no, right? I wasn't homeschooled. I turned out fine, right? There are kids who really need it. And for many reasons, intellectual, emotional, social, psychological, right? But once again, it comes back to a question of equity. Can can this person get what they need? And if they can't get it in the systems that exist, then we find somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with that problem, right? If you go to a medical provider and you have a rare allergy and they can't treat that rare allergy, you're going to find a specialist, right? We do this all the time in the medical community. I don't know why with our neurodivergent kids, everyone's like, ooh, but isn't that going to be weird? Man, my kids are already weird. I want to give them the weird they need. It really is. There are so many bright lights in our shared field, and Harry being, a phenomenal example of that. Yeah. But really, the vast majority of the people I come across are just like, this is really hard. I have a piece of information for this broader puzzle of how to survive parenting a neurodivergent kid. Here it is. Share it with others, and we all build each other up that way. My style, my practice is an amalgamation of the hundreds of people I collaborate with, and and I hope I've given them a little bit of something too.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well, and just having the space available, just being, like you said, humble enough and gracious to people to say, I want to share what I do know and what's successful. I want to learn more. So if you have some success stories, share them with me, right. And then to really know that not only gaining all of this information, but really putting it into action. And that's kind of where in your home and as a teacher, as a business provider, as an employer, that's where we really put into action and make things tangible for setting up the environment in the best way we can. What are some ideas that you might give to a school that you go into to do a presentation for? What are some accommodations that you might ask them to provide?
So the first accommodation I often suggest is, why are we doing it this way? Right? And because I want people to start thinking curiously. I want people to start questioning that, the most dangerous sentence in the English language is, we've always done it that way. And so I usually use this example. It's like, okay, so I'm going to make one of you come up here and do a talk. And everyone like, really like, okay. But instead of you coming up here and giving a talk with a PowerPoint, I could also let you write a paper or take a chapter test. Which would you rather do? And people are like, oh, I'd rather write a paper. I'd rather take a chapter test. I'm an extrovert. I'd rather do a presentation. I'm like, that simple exercise, giving people 2 additional choices for assessment is just, it's such a low energy way to give people more efficacy in how they demonstrate knowledge. We have to, there are systems that exist require us to show what we know, but there's no reason we have to only do that one way. If you have a kiddo who has to do a science fair project, and instead of running an experiment, they want to talk to an expert and illustrate that conversation, there's literally no reason why you can't do it that way. If we send learning through kids' interests and we adapt and differentiate based on their learning profile, everybody does better. They learn more, they engage deeper, and they retain more. And that's what we sort of talked about before, right? The best practices in gifted education are just the best practices in education. I want everyone to get this, right? Because you can't tell me there's a 11-year-old kid in Provo right now who would do a lot better talking about math if he could do a tangible demonstration to his peers. And this kid doesn't need to be gifted or autistic or dyslexic. This kid can just be neurotypical, but he would still do better if we played to his strengths and interests, right? One of my favorite things, you're just such a great example of this. One of the teachers that at one of the gifted schools I work with, he was like, all right, guys, y'all love Scratch, right? So I want you guys to make a video game in Scratch over something that you've read in your English class over the last year. And these are the kids who hate English. They're like, ELA is the worst. But like, I can make a Tom Sawyer video game? All right. And then they're finding that they're rereading the books and they're finding pieces to make the game more interesting, right? It's like, oh, where is Hannibal, Missouri? I got to look that up. And these kids are showing engagement and retention and application of knowledge, because we're moving past a world where you need to know all 50 US state capitals, right? We're moving to a place like, why are those capitals there? Why are they not other places? What do you do with that information, right? Boom. Now we're thinking about the 21st century and creating kids that are prepared for the world that we are creating, not the world that is rapidly becoming antiquated.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so hard too, because those systems have been in place for so long, but they're not in, they're dust, you know? And it's so interesting. Where do you see like an opening in the future where these things will start to come down? I mean, I guess in other programs opening schools in this sort of manner, how do we get our public school systems to agree and to understand and to make these changes?
Well, the number one thing we need to do, and it's funny because I'm going to speak directly to all you parents out there, is that we need to change. Because every parent says, oh my gosh, play-based learning, and oh my gosh, projects, oh, that sounds great. And then 3 months later, but what's their GPA? I mean, are they going to get into Princeton? Are they going to get into BYU? And it's like, guys, they're learning, right? If you stripped out grades, right, and just learn what you want to learn, and we'll make sure you learned it, right? Kids do better, their mental health problems go down, their social skills go up, and they end up in colleges that are actually better fits for them, rather than everybody racing to the top, right? I've got kids that I work with who, yes, they're going to go to MIT because it's the right fit school for them. But the kids who get shoehorned into MIT are the kids who end up dropping out, transferring, or having significant mental health challenges, because MIT is not for everybody. I'm a gifted adult, right? I'm a very smart person. I wouldn't last 3 minutes at MIT, right? I mean, it's just not how my brain is wired.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So like, the parents need to change how we feel about it, because it's navigating that anxious burst of, oh my gosh, is my kid going to have a GPA to get into university? They're not going to have a traditional GPA, but they're going to have a portfolio of work that shows XYZ University, wow, this kid has actually spent the 12 years of public education actually doing stuff, not just, and then the state capital of Wisconsin is Madison, because yay, that's going to help you win pub quiz someday, but it doesn't help you get a job interview, right?
No.
So that's what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
And so parents need to change, and then with the parents' support, we start electing more school board officials and superintendents who are on the cutting edge of this kind of educational shift, and then they get the support, right? So now we've got this sort of alignment of the administration, the parents, and the teachers who already want to do this work. With those three things combined, I mean, listen, we can literally change the world.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I say this all the time, I'm not an educator, right? I teach a college class, right? But I don't have that public education background, right? I understand mental health and I understand child development, but I have to be able to speak education to do my job. So I talked to a lot of teachers. I was like, do I have this right? Because I don't want to be wrong. And they're like, absolutely. I'm like, let's go. Right? Because it feels organic. It feels like, nobody went to college to get a teaching degree to follow this book this thick of how to teach a kid how to read. Nobody, no single teacher who does that, right? But they're sort of forced to. If we can let go of the reins a little bit, invest in our trust in our teachers, and then show that trust as parents, so many good things are going to happen.
Absolutely. And, I love when parents can really, again, take accountability for their child going into the world and really start to hone in on what does my child's learning process look like? Mm-hmm. That doesn't have to be a job of teachers. It can be a job of parents. Like parents can have enough interest in their child to try to understand what they're learning. And that is just in educating these parents, right? That there are different learning styles that you can help identify for your child, with your child, and help your teacher understand your child's teacher rather, so that they can better fit and suit their needs. And that goes across all boards too, typical, neurodivergent, everything. Every child has a different learning system and a different way that they intake and process the information. And the sooner and better that we can help identify for these teachers and schools, the better off we'll all be, I think. And
right?
Yeah. And I love that we have, like you said, things like, I'm not really into like watching videos. I think they're kind of intrusive because I haven't chosen what I'm going to want to watch, and it just plays at me and I'm like, I don't really want to see that. But I think it's great when you can find videos that are positive, and these, a lot, that's what these kids are doing these days. Like, we need to access kids where they're at and not where our grandparents were at. And we need our world to address that correctly. Let's access these kids here where they're at today in 2023, not in 1954, where they, like you said, took the ABC quiz on the states.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally what this leads into is a conversation about neurodivergence, where it's about what can you do and I'll meet you there, rather than why can't you X?
Yes.
Because I remember much more of the conversations about why can't you? Why aren't you? Much more so than like, oh, you're in third grade and you won an art competition against adults because you drew a bicycle safety campaign that was amazing. And they were like, wait, you're an 8-year-old and you just won this art competition? All right, like, yeah, I'm here. I want to, and it's certain, but it's all like, why aren't you more organized? Why don't you have more friends? Why aren't you in high school already? Why? It's like, hey, these are different brains that come with different strengths and different weaknesses, and nobody would choose the struggles those things present with, right? Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many kids I work with who would love to be able to just show up at a party or a bar, make a bunch of people, do a little small talk, get a couple phone numbers and go home, right? But if the idea of that makes you have a panic attack, nobody would choose that. So we have to meet them where they are. And that is both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And I think that's where a lot of people perhaps lose the plot a little bit.
Yeah. And it really, when we're talking about accommodating workplaces, I think that it's very, very individual, of course, to one's own opinion and desire to be identified as whatever they would like to be. There's this fine line between not giving the information due to your own ego or sensitivities. And then there's a fine line of wanting these accommodations or needing these accommodations made for you, and being able to let go of that part of that ego and really be okay with the identity that you are portraying and that you're giving, and saying, hey, I have all of these amazing skills, but there is a place where I struggle, and I'm going to need support in this place. And I hope that you'll be able to do that as an employer or something like that. That needs to be normalized more.
Very much. I mean, couldn't agree more, right? Like that is, and it's sort of funny because it's the inherent problem with going on a podcast or speaking at a conference is that you're sort of speaking to the converted, right? I don't think too many people who are like, nope, education is just fine are going to dial into this podcast. But we have these conversations to tell our community that they're not wrong, that they're not crazy. But also that if now we have a piece of tangible evidence that we've created that then trickles down to, well, now I have a thing to show you, right, about why I think we should teach my kiddo different. And, and those things, create that critical mass we talked about before.
Mm-hmm. Those communities where we can get ourselves and our kids, and they can start meeting people with like-minded interests and things, and really showing up for ourselves and showing up for them. Like I said, not being afraid. One of our quotes is, a little bit of knowledge turns fear into understanding.
Oh, I love that.
That can go from children to senior, because children need that information. They're curious. They want to know. That, like you said, they come with a kind curiosity. They don't come with hatred or judgment. They come with this kindness and this curiosity. And the more that we feed them the correct information, the better they can deal with, take it with them and use it correctly. And as far as, with older generations, the more we can help them to understand, but also be aware that not everybody is going to be at a place where they're going to want to understand or want to change their mind. And being okay with that, being able to walk away and saying, that's okay. I don't need to keep forcing my opinion on you to change your mind because I know you're neurodivergent. You don't, kind of an idea. I hear that happening in some, people I know. They're like, I see you. And they're like, no, you don't, and I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. Everybody will be on their own time and their own journey. But knowing that there are communities to come to have support is huge today.
I mean, so huge. And it's one of my favorite things I say all the time is like, there's so much value to knowing that your child is a zebra, not a weird horse.
I love that.
It's wonderful. And do you know what the word for a group of zebras is?
I can't remember. I used to.
Yeah. So, like you could call it a herd, right? And that's like, womp, womp. That's not really, like technically that's true. But the other accepted word for it is a dazzle.
Oh.
A dazzle of zebras. And we are a dazzle of neurodivergence, I say. I love
that.
Wouldn't you rather be a dazzle?
100%. It's funny you said that. In a podcast I did that about myself on someone else's show a long time ago, he asked me at the beginning, how did you feel about yourself when you were 9 years old? What was your idea of who you were and everything? And I said to him, I was a unicorn who was always outside of everything, looking in, just prancing about, doing my own sparkly unicorn thing, and wasn't any wiser of anything else. And then he asked, well, how do you feel today? And I was like, well, now I have my own group of unicorns and we're all doing our own thing together. And it's like that I found this pasture with all these other people that I belong with. But that is so true too. I love it. A dazzle.
Right. And we can all be a dazzle together. And that is kind of beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah.
Right. Then you don't spend your life as a parent or as a educational professional or mental health professional trying to cram a kid into a box that does not fit them. Yeah. And, an example I often use for my clinical work is when we think about the, asynchronous development of our kids, right? My mentor, Gene Peterson, always used to say, each gifted kid is 5 kids, right? So if you're a gifted teacher out there and you're like, I have only 10 kids in my class, why am I so exhausted? It's because you have 50 kids in your class because of the different developmental levels, right? So, I have a 9-year-old on my caseload who is taking graduate courses in multivariate calculus. Now, you might ask me, what's that? I don't know. So don't... something involving numbers.
Yeah, right.
But he can't tie his shoes.
Yeah.
He hasn't developed the fine motor skills for that yet. So what do you think he has meltdowns about? Right? Not the calculus, right? And he'll say to me, how is it my brain works this well here and this well over here? And that's just the kind of brain you have. That's your neurodivergence. And I'm going to teach you how to tie your shoes, because I would be doing him and his family a disservice if I said, shouldn't he know how to tie his shoes? He's 9, gosh darn it.
Yeah.
Right? I've lost that family immediately, right? And that's why, it's just we meet them where we are and we do the best we can from that place.
1,000%. I know that's not a thing, but I still say it. Anyways, I see that so often because along the same lines, DJ, my sweet 13-year-old, who studies 133 languages and can identify and tell anyone what any language or number is and anything, still cannot tie his shoes. And we would never, make that anything that was a necessity or a level of importance. But yeah, it's so important that you meet them where they're at and that you support them where they're at, because although he does have this high intellectual and capabilities and amazing things that he shows us, it's so hard for him to have social encounters. It's so hard for him to he parallel plays rather than interacts with others. And I know that I sense that he wants to get to know people, but people don't understand how to get to know him. Right. And that is something we're just going to have to keep working on, right? In our entire life of DJ. But we will. I'm dedicated to 100% to doing that for him. So.
Well, and the way I often frame it to people is that when we get stressed out, we opt into what we call top-down thinking, where we want things to be perfect or good, and anything less than that is derivation, which is bad. Right. So I wanted 100 on the test. I got a 94. That brain goes, oh, I got 6 points off. Right. But if we flip that to bottom up thinking, it gives us cumulative credit for everything we've done. So it's like, I knew 94% of that. That's pretty awesome. Right. So DJ, I think if you took a survey of most Americans, right, they might barely know one language, let alone 133. Was that the number?
Until Google translates is what he'll tell you, and until it updates, of course.
Right. I love it. And that's the thing. It's and you can tell I'm weird because given what I do for a living, I'm not surprised by that. I'm oh, that makes sense. That's my weird universe. That's a normal thing for a kid to do, right? But it's the sort of thing, that's exactly it. Why would we lose the strengths for a developmental difference, right? And So I always tell parents, it's like when you're talking about your kid, it's and not but, right? My kid knows 133 languages and he can't tie his shoes. Not my kid knows 133 languages, but he can't, because tying shoes has nothing to do with learning languages, right?
Yes.
Unless like the Farsi is written on the shoelaces somehow. I don't know. I can't even make it work.
There we go. Maybe that's what I need. Oh, that's great.
We unlocked it. There we go.
Yes. Oh, that's great. And I always tell parents that too. And I, mean this with all due respect to all families and everyone out there that, and this is just a very general idea that I have, but your kid has their whole life to eat a sandwich if they want to. Your kid has their whole life to sit on the toilet, and your kid has their whole life to learn how to tie their shoes. And it doesn't have to be within these time constraints that society has put forth hundreds of years ago for our great grandparents to be able to make it through the Depression. It is now 2023, and we can put our slip-ons with no shoelaces on and go about in the world, and we're just fine. So let's take advantage of the things that we have and not take for granted all of those other things either. But really, move into today, people.
I mean, I read a book recently where it's like, kids today can't read a map. And I'm like, they don't have to. There's a system of satellites that tells us where to go that is infinitely more accurate than a map would ever be. And like, well, what if the satellites go down? Well, then probably an EMP has gone off and we've got different problems, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so, once again, the most dangerous sentence in the English language. We've always done it that way.
Yeah.
If you want to learn to read a map, go with God, my child, right? Do it. That's awesome, right? But to say a kid is less than for not having learned a map is like, why would we teach our kids how to use a typewriter now? I mean, the technology has passed it. You mentioned DVDs before. I'm not going to collect DVDs anymore.
Exactly, right?
I have 9 streaming services that I somehow pay more for than cable, but that's a different problem. But it's this sort of thing, like, the world is changing and we must change with it.
Yeah.
And that's scary because you are really building the plane as you fly it. Yeah. And that's why we've got to support each other and show up for each other and cheer each other, because there are people who get to fly the planes that are already built, and that's awesome for them. Our kids, they need their own planes, and we've got to do it, right? Yeah. I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but you better believe I'm going to support you with all my heart to get you there.
Absolutely. I think we could just talk for hours and hours and hours.
Probably,
I think that we're just going to make the longest podcast ever. I've seen some of those Joe, he can go on for hours, those 5-hour podcasts. Woo! But it's been so great to catch up with you and get to know you. Tell everybody where we can go to support you and to find out how to get in contact with you.
So the website for my practice is the neurodiversitycollective.com. And if that's too much of a mouthful, just punch my name into Google, because I have a very unique name. I'm like the whole first page of Google now. I'm very proud of that.
I love it.
And we have a really fun Facebook community, facebook.com/Dr. Matthew Zakreski. It's a little bit of science, a little bit of mental health, a lot of nerd humor. We love the nerd humor. And honestly, I haven't been to Utah since I was 13 years old, and my dad got kicked out of the Mormon Tabernacle, which is a funny story I'll tell you some other time. I was like, oh, look, Dad, you're the one who pissed off the Mormons.
That's hilarious.
And so I would love to come back to Utah and speak to a school or speak to a community, because it's like, so many of the kids that we both serve have that overlap, right? So all kids benefit from the things we're talking about, meeting them where they are, talking about equity, focusing on strengths and interests. I mean, every kid benefits from that. So if you need an expert or experts, right, because we could team up and do this IRL.
Absolutely.
Right? Then give us a shout and we'll come to you, and we'll, kill them with kindness and science. And then they're like, we have to change everything we're doing. We're like, yes, that's right. Good job. Right? And everybody wins, because I like when everybody wins.
I love that. Oh, thank you so much. This has been such a
Yeah.
great conversation, and I just, yeah, I don't want to stop, but I'm gonna just let our listeners take a little break. But why don't we invite you back on in the future so that we can catch up with you again?
If you insist. I mean,
I do.
no, not that. That would be terrible. Except that that's exactly what I want. So
Oh, thank you.
until we do it again, but this was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to staying in touch.
All right.